Keanu Reeves got insulted by a passenger on a subway train. Until his identity was revealed, everyone was shocked, but what he did next will leave you speechless. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Let's dive in. It was a freezing winter evening in New York City. The subway was packed, as usual, with tired workers, students, and business people heading home. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp coats and overheated metal. Conversations hummed, keyboards clicked, and music leaked from countless headphones. Among the crowd stood a man who looked completely out of place. His long, greasy, tangled hair partially covered his face. His beard was uneven, thick, and unkempt, with patches of dirt visible on his pale, tired skin. His clothes were mismatched, an oversized, ragged coat with sleeves too long for his arms, a torn hoodie underneath, and stained jeans that barely held together. His shoes were the worst of all, old sneakers with holes so large his bruised feet were visible. He gripped the metal pole tightly as the train jerked forward, but he made no eye contact with anyone. He just stood there, staring at the floor. His shoulders were slumped as if he carried an invisible weight too heavy to bear. Passengers glanced at him with disgust. Some quickly looked away, pretending not to notice. Others sneered, whispered, and even smirked. Near him, a young man in an expensive designer jacket wrinkled his nose and leaned over to his friend. "Dude, I swear the city is getting worse. Why are homeless people allowed on public transport? Smells like a dumpster in here." His friend laughed under his breath. "Bro, just look at him. He's probably going to start begging any second now." A well-dressed businessman, wearing an expensive three-piece suit, sighed loudly and shook his head. He adjusted his pristine leather briefcase before glaring at the ragged man. "You don't belong here," he snapped, his voice dripping with irritation. "People like you should be out on the streets, not taking up space in a subway car for actual working citizens." A few passengers chuckled quietly. Others just continued scrolling through their phones, indifferent to what was happening. Nearby, a security guard, built like a tank in a dark blue uniform, took a step closer. His gloved hand rested on his belt, his eyes locked onto the ragged man with suspicion. "Sir," the guard said firmly, his voice sharp, "I'm going to have to ask you to step off at the next stop. This train isn't for vagrants." The man remained still. His eyes, dark and hollow, finally lifted from the floor and met the guard's gaze. There was no anger in them, no fear, just deep exhaustion, the kind of weariness that comes from years of hardship. The guard narrowed his eyes. "Did you hear me? Next stop, you're off." The businessman scoffed. "Honestly, they should just start banning these people from public spaces." A few people nodded in agreement. Others simply stared. Then a sudden gasp broke the tension. A young woman sitting near the edge of the train car had been absent-mindedly scrolling through her phone. But now her eyes were wide with shock. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked up at the ragged man, then back at her phone, then back at the man again. Her heart pounded. "Oh my God," she whispered, barely able to form the words. Nobody paid her much attention at first, but then she stood up abruptly, her hands shaking as she held her phone out. "Oh my God, do you guys know who that is?" she gasped. The sneering stopped. The laughter died instantly. The businessman frowned. The security guard hesitated. The young man in the designer jacket blinked in confusion. The woman turned her phone screen toward them, revealing a high-resolution image of Keanu Reeves at a red carpet event. Dressed in a sleek black suit, smiling humbly at the camera. She pointed at the ragged man. "That's Keanu Reeves." A stunned silence filled the train car. The businessman's jaw fell open. The security guard's posture stiffened. The young man in the designer jacket's face turned pale. The people who had just insulted him, laughed at him, wanted him off the train, now stared at him in horror. The ragged man sighed softly, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He had seen this reaction before. He had been through this before. People always judged by appearance, never by character. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reeves," the businessman stammered, his arrogance shattered into a million pieces. I I didn't recognize you. Keanu shook his head slowly. You don't have to apologize to me, he said, his voice calm yet firm. But maybe next time, be kinder to people even if you don't know who they are. The businessman looked down, ashamed. The security guard quickly lowered his hand from his belt, stepping back uncomfortably. The young man in the designer jacket swallowed hard, shifting awkwardly. People who had once laughed now exchanged guilty glances. The train slowed down as it approached the next stop. As the doors slid open, Keanu took a deep breath and stepped off without another word. The passengers inside the train watched in stunned silence as he disappeared into the crowded platform, vanishing into the city like a ghost. The businessman, still holding his briefcase, sank into his seat, his face burning with shame. The security guard looked at his hands, suddenly unsure of his job, and the young man in the designer jacket, the one who had laughed the loudest, now sat quietly, lost in thought. No one spoke for the rest of the ride, but in their silence they all understood one thing. They had judged a man not by his soul, but by his clothes. And they would never make that mistake again. Moral of the story: never judge a person by their appearance, because you never know who they truly are or what they've been through.